Welcome to day 2 of the FPP Fussycutting Challenge. Today we're going to talk about fabric, how to cut it, all the things we need to do to prepare to sew. Doing all this prep work behind the scenes will make it a bit more streamlined when it's actually sewing time. So let's jump in and talk about fabrics. These are my choices for my little TV. I'm using the main print for my next fabric collection called Bloom. It's for Riley Blake Designs and it'll be in quilt shops in May. And it has lots of motifs that are perfect for fussy cutting. So I'm going to use this for the feature screen on my little TV. I'm using solids for the outer of the TV in this lovely dark green, and I'm going to use the black for the background. Solids are great with foundation paper piecing because there's no right or wrong side to the fabric. So if you're still getting your head around the whole how do I foundation piece process, solids can be your best friend. However, don't let it stop you from going nuts with prints and have print. Like the main thing out of this, I want you to have fun and really enjoy making these tiny TVs. So I've already cut these to size because you don't need to see me cutting strips of fabric. I have 2 inches by width of fabric for my background, which will be more than enough for my tiny TV. And then I have actually cut this a little bit smaller than the fabric requirements. In my patterns, I tend to err on the generous side with the fabric requirements, just to allow for if you get a little bit scissors happy or if you happen to have a mistake. So I've cut mine at 1 1/4 inch wide, which is actually way more than what we need. These are only like a little bit over 1/4 inch wide, so I have plenty there. Okay, so let's have a look at the actual fabric. I've decided I'm going to fussy cut this little ladybug here at the edge. So I really like to have it close to the edge so I'm not using up a heap of fabric and not ending up with that Swiss cheese effect. Which look, if I wanted to use this big bee, he's right in the middle, so I would end up with a bit of a Swiss cheese look if I just cut this section out. So I tend to try and just cut mine in strips to keep the remainder of the fabric tidy. That's just a personal preference, but if I can, I will look for the motif that is closer to the edge. So with this one, I want to make sure that I'm going to have enough on all sides. It needs to have a full 1/4 inch on all sides of where we are actually going to be sewing. So remember, we need to flip that over because this is the way the fabric will be facing. And I can just check that I will have a 1/4 inch on all of those sides, which I do. So what I will do then, I just keep it in place. Look, you could pin it. I'm a bit of a lazy quilter, and so like, don't call the quilt police on me because you can't sew in jail, right? But I like to make it as easy as possible. So that's what I'm all about. So for this, I would literally just have it placed on there. Make sure I have my bug centered for where I want it. And then I will trim just like this at a bit of a weird angle, just so that I'm not using up too much of my fabric. Now the edge of my screen is way over there, so I can probably move my ruler here. And I'm just going to cut straight across, and I'm going to cut, oops, a rectangle out like that. So that leaves my fabric semi-tidy without like Swiss cheese holes in the middle, so that I can come back later and grab that bee or that flower and they've not been cut into already. If you do end up with a Swiss cheese, remember you can always use that for other piecing, especially in foundation paper piecing. You can use all of this for background. So don't stress over that. If your motif's in the middle of your fabric, just try and like cut it as nicely as you can, remembering to be generous with your 1/4 inch all the way around here. So there we have it. That's my fabrics ready to go. So I have my feature screen, I have my outer TV, and I have my background. The other thing you can do to prepare ready for sewing is get your templates ready to go. So I like to cut mine roughly around the edge into sections. Some people like to cut their templates quite precisely. I'm quite content with it just being rough cut, and then I will trim it down to size when I'm finished. Use scissors that are dedicated for paper, okay? The reason we don't use our fabric scissors when we're cutting is because we don't want to dull the blades by cutting paper. So these scissors here, they are my paper only ones, and I use them for whenever I'm cutting my templates. So cut your templates up, ready to go. Just cut it in between those. There we go. I've got section A and section B. All right, so we're going to go and chat Next, I'm going to take you over to the sewing table. We'll talk about a few notions that make it a little bit easier, and then we're going to get ready to sew. Just a quick little chat over some notions and tools that can help make foundation paper piecing easier. These are some that I use when I'm piecing. First up, paper. So I tend to use this foundation piecing paper, which is a specialty paper. It's one that I've got through Riley Blake Designs, and you can purchase at quilt shops. Now, the specialty paper is different from regular printer paper in that it's a lighter weight paper, so it's quite thin. So you can see those lines really nicely through the paper. So there's the printed side, that's the unprinted side. So when you're placing things, especially for fussy cutting, you can see it so much easier where you're going to be putting your fabric ready to go. It also tears away easier at the end. Now that said, we all quilt to what's in our budget. So if specialty paper is not for you, or you're just dabbling a little bit in foundation piecing, go with your regular copy or printer paper. The biggest thing I recommend is going for recycled paper, or the cheapest one you can, as it tends to be a little bit thinner. And that's what you want, just so you can see the lines through and your paper tears away easily at the end. Next up, thread. So this is one of my favorites, or actually this is my favorite, Wonderful Deco Bob. And I also use pre-wound bobbins. I'd never used pre-wound bobbins before this, but now I'm an absolute convert. It's so much quicker and easier than winding your own bobbins, and there's so much more thread on there than there is when you do it yourself, because it's really tightly wound. Now, Deco Bob is a lighter weight thread, so it works really beautifully in your foundation paper piecing because your seams lay a bit flatter because it's a thinner thread. So I'm a big fan of using that. The other thing I like to use is a finger presser, and you can see that's angled there, and you smooth your seams down with it rather than ironing every seam. It does not replace your iron, it just makes the process a little faster at the sewing machine. Now, the other thing is the humble glue stick. So we use that sometimes if you just need to place your fabric onto your template to hold it into place. So here's our template. We know that we're going to be putting this in the center, and I want to make sure my ladybug is lined up. So I'm just going to move that around to make sure my ladybug is centered. And not only that, I want to make sure, remember, there's a 1/4 inch all the way around. So that's looking pretty good to me. So look, honestly, I usually just pin it, and I would just pin in the middle. That's a very rough job, but it'll do the trick. The main thing when you're pinning it, try not to have your pin over any of the lines where you're going to be sewing. You don't want to be sewing over pins if you can help it. So you can pin it in place, and then you're ready to go to the sewing machine, or you can use the humble glue stick and just put a little dob in the center. And it's just got to be enough just to hold your fabric in place until you've done that first seam. So it doesn't need to cover the whole section. It just literally needs to be a little bit to just hold it in place. So again, I'm going to center that, make sure I've got my 1/4 inch on all sides, and just press where I put that glue. Now that'll tear off easily at the end because I've only put a little bit of glue, and it's just a regular like school glue stick. Okay, so that's the notions. Now we're ready to sew.